In this video, we're going to be taking a look at this problem that a customer recently sent me this photo where they purchased one of our fonts and then went to cut that font out, and this is the result that they got. Now, this particular customer is brand new to Rhinestones, and I thought this would be a good video to cover because this is a very common problem, especially when you're first starting out with Rhinestones. And there are some critical things that we need to understand why this happens and how, more importantly, how to resolve it. Now, this particular customer purchased one of our Rhinestone fonts, and then they converted that Rhinestone font as far as resized it using the demo of EasyStone. And then they took that finished product and brought it into Great Cut software, which is a separate cutting software for GCC cutters. Now, I too use a GCC cutter. But there's a lot of variables that go on when you go to cut something. So it's really important that you understand your cutter, your cutting software, and exactly what it needs, because there are some critical parameters that we really have to understand. And that's what we're hoping to accomplish in this video, is explain what's really happening here. So obviously this result is not a usable result. And so why is this happening? Well, let's first go ahead and just type out the letter Y here. We'll open up our font manager. Now she was using the EST Arial 1.4. Okay, so here is our letter Y. And then the first thing we're going to do is resize those circles. Now, when I'm resizing my circles, I have it set up to use 3.4 millimeter circles. So we'll go ahead and click on Resize Font. Okay, now your dimension, your diameter of your stone could very well be different than mine. But this is part of that initial process of understanding what your cutter actually needs. So we have a test file that you can download and cut. In fact, if we go over here to the website here, let's just go over to EasyStone here. And we'll click on the Rhinestone Design Shop, and here in our search box here, we'll just type in cutter test. And this is the file that you want to download and cut. Okay, and what this essentially is a series of circles with different size diameter stones. And what you do is you go ahead and cut this template just as it is, and then see which set of circles with your vinyl cutter, with your cutting software, with your settings within that cutting software, what size circles is going to best fit for your rhinestones that you're using. So that's the first step. What diameter circles do you need? Now, in my cutting software, I use the K&K Studio software, and in my cutting software, it has some options in there where I can manipulate what the cutter actually cuts. So there's some special settings in there where I can manipulate it so that 3.4 millimeter is the correct size circle. I could also manipulate the software so that 3.2 millimeter is the correct size circle. So it's kind of weird how that particular cutting software works because of those additional parameters that we can kind of trick the software, if you will, into thinking different size circles are appropriate for the same rhinestone. So it's really important that you do this cutting test to determine, first of all, what size circles you really should be using. Then the other critical part of this is the spacing between circles. Now, if we go back over here to our test file here, you can see that just by opening up the file and resizing our font, you can see that there's plenty of room between each circle. They're not overlapped. If you look at this result, you can see that these circles are being cut big enough where they're literally overlapping one another. And you can see over here, it's really too close and it's tearing. So those are some critical issues. Now, if we look at this result, you can see obviously that these circles are in fact closer to one another. The spacing between them is in fact closer than one another than these circles. Okay. Now, if you look at the left and the right, you can see that the spacing between these and the spacing between these are the same. So here, if you look at the cut result, you can see here we didn't have issues with the template tearing, whereas here we did. Okay, so those are all considerations as well. Now, the other consideration is I don't know exactly how the end user, how they went about weeding this template. They did tell me they were having some difficulties with cutting the template. So if they put the template on a real sticky, smooth surface and then peeled it away, you know, it could have ripped easily, because that's one of the things that we struggle with is we want nice tight stone spacing, but if we get too tight of stone spacing, then our template can rip like it did here on the left. So it's a bit of a catch-22. But the issue down here, that's a more serious issue. And again, if you look at the artwork here in CorelDRAW, we should not get this result because there is spacing between these stones. So why are we getting this result? Well, the reason that we're getting this result that we're getting is because our cutter, you can see there's not much spacing between these circles, but the cutting software is telling the cutter to cut slightly larger circles than it really should. So really what we need to do is leave our stone spacing the same size as it is, and maybe we want to drop down to 3.2 millimeter. So we can come in here and we'll go ahead and drop down to 3.2 millimeter stones. And so that will increase the spacing. I don't know if you can see that. Let me undo that. That will increase the spacing between these stones. If we make our circle smaller, so see how tight the spacing is there. Let me just duplicate this. And what I'm doing is I'm resetting. I just manually entered 3.2 here. And I right click on Resize Font. Now the circles, watch these circles. The spacing will grow bigger here. So you see there? So now the spacing, you can see visually the spacing is definitely wider here. Okay? But so now if we send this to the cutter, you can see we'll have a better result. And most likely it won't cut like it did here. But then of course the other trick is we have to make sure that when we do cut this out with 3.2 millimeter circles, we do need to make certain that the stones will actually brush into the template. So as long as we understand what's going on, then we can set up our artwork accordingly. Now, I generally use 0.5 millimeter spacing. You can see here, that's the Easy Stone default, is a 0.5 millimeter spacing. Now, depending on the template material you're using and the cutter and so on and so forth, I know a lot of people that use even tighter spacing than that, like 0.3 of a millimeter. So it really just depends. Now, I actually cut with a GCC Expert Pro, which I absolutely love. It's a great cutter for the money, but I use a 0.5 millimeter spacing when I'm cutting templates. I just find that that works better. So again, I would just encourage you to do that cutting test file, play with your stone spacing, so we know what the stone spacing is. And yes, if you have this issue where you have overlapping stones, we have to make sure the circle size is accurate. That's step number one. And then if you still have this issue where you have overlapping stones here, then yes, then we need to increase our stone spacing just a pinch. Now, I don't know what type of material, template material this particular user was using, but of course that can impact the result that you're going to get when you cut your template as well. So as long as we have a better understanding of what's happening, why it's happening, my guess is that there's some cutting parameters in the cutting software where these circles, because they're overlapping here and they're not in the artwork itself, then that tells me that it's most likely the cutter is actually cutting circles that are bigger than what it really should be. So that is what the issue would be there. So if we go ahead and, so you can see here, you see how these circles are now overlapping one another. but that's not how the artwork is. So if you need to make an adjustment, it's easy enough to make that adjustment just by adding a little bit more stone spacing. We can just stretch this out a little bit, right click again, reset those circles back to what they should be. Just like that. And then that will increase the spacing between the circles, and you won't have this issue with the template tearing. Thanks for watching.